Welcome back to the Sleep Edit, our podcast where we talk about all things sleep in children. I am Dr. Craig Canapari. I'm a pediatric sleep doctor.
And I'm Ariel, Greenleaf certified pediatric sleep consultant.
Fun. Okay, so we thought it would be fun today to talk about sleep myths, sleep pet peeves, things that I think are in common circulation in the world of pediatric sleep and the information that parents get that we don't think are either particularly useful or accurate. Ariel, I think on our list here, you put one of the things that we've talked about at length, wake windows.
Yes.
Wake windows are not a thing that are discussed in pediatric sleep doctor school. And we'll get into the reasons for that. I had not even heard about these before a few years ago. And then I started researching and I saw that this was all over the internet. I don't know if you want to take a pass at explaining what wake windows are
Sure.
exactly.
Yeah. Wake windows are essentially age based windows of time during which your child should be awake before they go back to sleep. So, time between sleep periods during the day. Basically, it's a system to determine when your baby or child is ready to go to sleep for a nap.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I think the idea behind wake windows is not a bad one, right? For lots of different reasons, parents struggle, especially in infants, about the timing of naps. So any system that purports to tell you the ideal formula for when your child should nap seems like a great idea. But I would say the problem is there's really not a lot of evidence that these things are particularly predictable.
Sure. And I'm glad to hear that on your end, it's basically the same as what I experience, at least with the people that come to me, even though there may not be there's no scientific background to it, or there's no medical background to it. For easier babies or go with the flow babies, these formulas can work, but those aren't the people that I'm seeing. Those aren't the people that come to me and say, I've looked these up, I've tried them, it's not working. Is my baby broken? Am I doing something wrong? And that's where I have a problem with the idea of wake windows. The majority of the people who come to me and are struggling have found these wake windows by Googling or looking on social media, and it's just not working for them. And they feel like something's wrong. And that's where I start to get frustrated because wake windows are literally everywhere you look as a parent and you say, how do I get my baby to nap? Just use these wake windows. And it can be very confusing and frustrating when it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think this is my main problem with it, right? There are parents who will say, "Oh, wake windows really help me with my baby's naps." I think the problem is if you look online, you're going to see all these different formulas about, okay, your child is 4 months old, here's how long they should be going for naps, and people are just making these numbers up.
Yes, exactly.
What bothers me is when a parent will say, wake windows didn't help my baby nap. What am I doing wrong? And the
Right.
problem is not the parent or the child. It's just, it tends to be a rigid system. We always say the kids don't read the textbooks, right? So things don't always fit. There are a couple of things that are constant. One is the number of naps that babies take as they get older is going to change. We're going to talk about this a little bit later too. The other is, and the reason for this is that as kids get older, their sleep drive matures. Drive is the phenomenon where the longer you're awake, the more likely you are to fall asleep. So for a healthy adult who's sleeping normally at night, you can be awake all day and not take a nap. So you accumulate sleep drive throughout the day from when you get up in the morning, say at 6 or 7 until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And that's normal. Babies accumulate sleep drive much more quickly. And that's why young babies are going to nap multiple times per day. A 2 or 3 year old might just nap once during the day, and an older child or a grown up won't nap at all, is because the rate of sleep drive accumulation changes over time. The problem, it's so individual about how quickly the sleep drive accumulates. There are many factors that determine nap timing as well. How long you slept the night before, what your baby's particular sleep biology is. Some kids need 12 hours of sleep, some need 18. Those kids are going to have different intervals between the naps, different nap durations. And there's also just this underlying thing of when your first kid, you may have the luxury of having them on a schedule they want. But then your second or third kid, guess what? You're getting your kid up. You have to go get the other kid at preschool. Many people have to put their kids in daycare. And then often they're trying to fit their kid's nap into a schedule that may not be particularly natural for them.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting because I feel as though on my end, one of my biggest jobs is to determine specific a specific formula for a baby or child's day. What can they handle? What is that window of time that tends to be the child has built up enough sleep drive to take a decent nap, but not hasn't been kept up so long that they're overtired or struggling to fall asleep. And sometimes for some children, it's crazy. There's literally like a 5-minute window. If we miss it, the nap's going to be short or skipped. It's wild. But I would say a lot of people that come to me have babies that are a little bit more on the sensitive side. That's why they've come to me. They're not one of those easygoing babies that you can go with the flow. But it's it's very clear. One thing that came very clear to me within the first year of doing this was how different every child really is from the next. And I do think it's fine to start with the basics that are out there. You can look at what might work for a 5-month-old or a 6-month-old and start there. But then we need to look at how is the baby or the child reacting? Are they starting to get cranky before that nap? And are they getting really cranky? And then you put them down and they don't fall asleep easily. But we find that before they get cranky, if we catch them before that time, then they do sleep well. And that is super individualized. I get really frustrated with the wake window idea because every baby or child is going to have a very different, I call it a formula. When I sit down and I'm analyzing the data, the patterns start to show themselves pretty quickly. Some children just really do need less sleep than others. And others are just, once you get them sleeping well, you're like, wow, this child was cranky because they were so crazy tired and needed way more sleep than we thought they did. So that's wake windows are something very individualized. They're not, in my experience.
Yeah, no, if you find an online calculator or something and it helps you, that's great. It may be a good place to start working, but it's it's not really magic here. And if you're struggling, the problem is not you or your inability to execute on it. It's just that your baby's needs are a little bit different. And I'm always leery of these kind of concepts that get very popular that make a subset of parents feel inadequate. The fact is, this stuff is hard. It's difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah, kids are not just like little robots, right? You put in a certain input, you expect a certain output.
Right.
So
And that's what I always say to them too. You can get a child sleeping well and they're going to have a rough night or a few rough nights and they start to freak out and it's at least this is going to happen. They're not robots. There are going to be times and days where they're going to be a little off. But I think that is important to understand that you can't just look at this formula and assume that every single day the child is going to consistently follow that formula because they are individuals.
I think I want to move on to our next kind of myth here, or I guess pet peeve, and that is the idea of the specific sleep regression. So, what a sleep regression is, it's a term that's not really used in the medical literature, but it is when a child that's been sleeping well, all of a sudden their sleep gets worse. And this is something that we all have observed as parents, as sleep professionals. I guess where I get into where I struggle with this is where it's like, it's the 7-month sleep regression. It's the 359-day sleep regression. It's the my team didn't make the playoff sleep regression. It's the moon is rising in Scorpio sleep regression. There seem to be a million one of these. If you put in the Google, it'll fill in all of these sleep regressions. And that really isn't based on anything.
And I think it ties nicely with the wake window idea because oftentimes you'll see your baby is now 6 months, and that means they're going to hit X regression. Similarly, they're 6 months, so they should be able to stay awake for this amount of time. the idea and the understanding that these babies are individuals and they are going to develop on their own timeline. For instance, my baby didn't crawl till she was 10 and a half months. And I started panicking because everywhere you look, it's like, uh-oh, if they're not crawling by X time, watch out. There could be something wrong with your baby. And my daycare even said something to me. So I was panicking. But sure enough, she crawled. She just did it on her own timeline. It's almost like setting parents up for failure and or fear. It's a little disconcerting because parents are worried. Some children don't even hit major regressions. Some children sail through every little thing and maybe have one bump in the road. Whereas others, like I said about that, that 5-minute window of time for when you can put them down for a nap, same thing. They start to get an inkling that they're going to crawl and their sleep goes haywire for a couple weeks. And that's where I get tripped up with this idea. Oh gosh, they're 8 months. Watch out. Warning sign ahead.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times the kid wakes up once or twice at night when things have been going well, and then the parents start Googling and be like, oh yeah, it's the 9 months, 3 days, and 57 minutes sleep regression. And then they just panic that it's something that they've done. There are some somewhat predictable disruptions in sleep, kids learning to walk, kids potty training, etc. I know Jody Mindell, who's at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, did an informal analysis on some data that she had, and unfortunately never published this, but she was looking at sleep data she'd collected over years in children and just seeing if there was any pattern of these periods of nighttime awakenings. And she was looking specifically to see if they corresponded with this book called The Wonder Weeks. This kind of came up with the idea of these very specific sleep regressions. In a nutshell, there didn't seem to be any predictability to these patterns of disruption or growth. It seemed to be very individual in child per child. So there isn't a lot of evidence that these are predictable things. That being said, I would say to a parent, if they're like, oh, my kid's sleep is good, now it's not good, what can I do? Have you changed something in your behavior around sleep? Have you started laying down with your child till they fall asleep when they used to have them fall asleep independently? Has bedtime slipped a little bit? Like the things that got you to success, often you need to revisit them when things start to go sideways on you. Or sometimes in a day or two, your kid's just going to come down with a cold, right?
Yeah, exactly.
An ear infection, they're teething.
I think that's
Well, sometimes I feel like we blame teething for everything that
everything.
goes awry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've looked at studies about that. The studies show that teething really doesn't cause as much trouble as it gets blamed for. So, whenever someone says, my baby's sleep has been crap for 6 months, they've been teething for 6 months. And that's the reason why. I like to tell them babies pretty much teeth until their 2-year molars come in. So, if you want to wait 2 years and blame everything at all on bad sleep on 2 years of teething, then go for it. But in general, teething might hurt as the tooth is starting to pop out. A little bit of Motrin or Tylenol can probably help with that kind of pain. It's not like they're getting kicked in the mouth with like by a horse or something like that.
The reason they're not
But
sleeping well.
similarly, there is evidence around gross motor developments, learning to crawl, learning to walk, also language development. You may have a child waking early and singing in their bed or speaking sentences all of a sudden in their bed. And that generally is around that 20, 21, 22, 23-month mark. But again, like that's a wide range. There are going to be sleep disruptions throughout childhood. Do I agree that they're going to happen at the same time for every child? No.
And going back to the teething thing too, honestly, I would say that us pediatricians are maybe a little bit to blame for this. Imagine your primary care doctor, someone comes in, be like, oh, my kid hasn't been sleeping for a couple of days. They see a tooth bud or something. They're like, oh, it's the teething. Sleep is a mysterious process, right? And sometimes it's just not great for a few nights. We just want to understand why things are going on. So the pediatrician wants to know too. And the pediatrician wants to give the parents something to hang their hat on, but you don't really get to do that with the 15 or 16-year-olds who come in who've never slept well.
It's
No, that's just
interesting
their
that you say that because even the idea of wake windows and regressions, we have such little control as parents, especially in nonverbal children. We're trying to decode what's going on. It's like we want some sort of an answer or some sort of a pattern or a routine that's going to work or make us feel more comfortable that our child is not sleeping well. Because we don't really know. We Sure, there are
Oh,
certain
yeah.
things, like we said, you move to a new house, the child isn't sleeping well. Of course, they're not sleeping well. They need to adjust. But not having those answers can feel really stressful. It can cause anxiety, and doctors don't have a lot of time with their patients. So it's, oh, the gum is red. They're teething. That's why. They got to give some sort of an answer so the parent doesn't leave thinking, then you said nothing's wrong, but why is this happening? They need a reason why. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, if your kid's been sleeping well, then there's a couple of nighttime awakenings. Give it a couple of days up to a week before you really worry or have to recalibrate things, especially if something has changed. You got back from vacation or something, it's not gonna be perfect. But if it's multiple times per night or it's not getting better after about a week, it's worth starting with your pediatrician.
Agreed. I think that's the first course of action. And the other thing I'd like to think about is the child completely inconsolable. If you go in and you take the child out of their crib or their bed and they're like perfectly fine once you go in there, then it's probably more just like they want you in there or something. They need a little soothing. But if they're completely inconsolable, there could be something medical going on. So it doesn't hurt to have that be the first course of action, especially again, one night is one thing, but if it's going on for a few nights, child is inconsolable, sleep is not happening for anyone, of course, that should be your first line of action. And then if it comes back that everything is a-okay from a medical perspective, think about what's been going on. Is there a new teacher, a new classroom? And then if you've slipped back into bad habits of going in every time and rocking or sleeping in bed or on the floor with the child, it's time to recalibrate and get back to basics and rebuild those boundaries.
Passing out with your hand inside the crib, like that
Right.
sort of thing. Parents accidentally amplify these feedback loops too. Say your kids learn to walk or like learning some new words. You hear them on your monitor, they're talking at night, and then you feel like you need to go in and do something. Well, honestly, if they're not upset, you don't need to do anything. I would give it a little minute, even if they cry out, or don't rush in because otherwise your kid's going to have those natural awakenings at night and then they're going to start expecting you. And then that's when things go off the rails.
100%.
Let's talk about a specific flavor of sleep regression called nap strikes. A nap strike is when a kid has been taking a nap at a certain time and then they start refusing to take that nap. So, what are the different things a parent might think about if all of a sudden a nap that was dependable is not happening anymore?
Of course, the first thing they think is, oh, this child doesn't need this nap anymore. Babies dropping a nap, that's super common and expected. They're going to move from newborn 4 or 5 naps down to 3 naps, then to 2 naps. And then they get into the toddler years and they're on the 1 nap. And then they're on no naps. That's when it becomes a little hairy because a lot of times there is a lot going on developmentally as they move into toddlerhood. So that 2 to 1 nap transition is often rushed because one of the naps is short or skipped for a little bit. Parents think, okay, it's time. And they move to 1 nap and it's a disaster. The child maybe just turned 2 and having a nap strike, and the parents, oh, it's time to be done with naps. But then nighttime falls apart. And in reality, the child still needs the nap. I think when we're talking about infants, it's different than when we're talking about older toddlers and preschoolers.
Yeah, we were back and forth about when naps can tend to get drops. For example, babies that are taking the third nap give it up between 6 and 15 months. And I got this data from Iglowstein, which is the big paper on pediatric sleep patterns. And I'll talk about some limitations of that in a moment. And I know you say that usually it's younger in your hands with your patient populations, like around 9 months.
Yeah, and I would say
Um,
even 9 months is pretty late. Once we see those first 2 naps consolidating more, like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours each, that 3rd nap almost kind of messes with nighttime. So, when I'm working with people, I've even had 6-month-olds just drop, well, you said 6 to 15 months, but 6-month-olds that are taking 2-hour naps during the day, and they no longer need that 3rd nap. They just go down. Again, that's a higher sleep need baby, to be fair. And so they're going to bed earlier and sleeping 12 to 13 hours overnight. But usually, in my experience, no later than 9 months are they going down to 2 naps.
and the limitation of the Iglowstein paper as well is that these were Swiss children. this is a pretty homogeneous group of kids. And for example, we know that in African American children, they tend to nap later than Caucasian children.
Later in the
Like, I
day?
just no, they like, as they get older. Kids going from a morning and afternoon nap to an afternoon only nap, I think the Iglostein stuff says 18 to 24 months, and you said younger than that, 13 to 18 months.
Yeah.
Iglostein talked about kids giving up napping entirely between ages 2 to 4 years, and I know you're saying a little bit later, ages 3 to 5. Have sometimes pathologized kids who are going to kindergarten and still napping, but that is actually fairly common in African American children. So it's important to recognize with any of these data sets that who are the population of kids that were studied? There are healthy children that nap after school in kindergarten, and
Hmm.
we don't want to overly pathologize this. We don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but the idea that there is a huge range of times in which children may give up their afternoon nap. And I think there was a study that came out 4 or 5 years ago. It was fairly controversial, saying that in this large data set, they were showing that a lot of kids, their nighttime sleep improved if they stopped napping after age 2. So they actually suggested that if you have a child with either going to bed really late or having disrupted sleep, getting rid of that nap, that single nap after age 2 may be helpful. Now, to me, that's a nuclear option, right? Because parents really depend on naps for sanity if they're home with the children. Also, in daycare,
Mm.
children of these age groups are expected to nap. And if the child is incapable of napping, it actually can lead to children being asked to leave the daycare.
Yeah.
Ariel, just because kids don't want to nap, it doesn't always mean that they don't need to nap.
Yeah. There's a lot there that I have to say because I get very frustrated. I understand as a parent, it's very frustrating to see the way naps are handled. But at the same time, you're a room of 12 children and they all have different napping needs. How do you handle that? So, what I often see is children that are pushed to one nap far too soon. And then the baby is struggling so badly just to get from that one nap in the middle of the day to a normal bedtime. And in those situations, what I do is I have the parent offer the 2 naps on the weekend, back up bedtime if they can, put them down earlier when they pick them up from daycare, which isn't always possible. But those are some mitigating factors that we can ways around it until the child is ready for that. On the other side of things, like you're saying, I have seen many times naps interfere with bedtime and or overnight sleep. Someone will come to me with a 2.5-year-old or a 3-year-old. She naps great. She sleeps 2.5 hours during the day, but then she won't fall asleep till 10 o'clock at night. And then she's up at 6 in the morning. And in those cases, I say, can we first start by capping the nap or changing the time of the nap? Sometimes if they're able to I find out that the nap isn't ending till 5 PM or something like that. If we can back the nap up and have it starting at noon and they're up by 2, playing around with those things can work, but I've definitely seen and understand why that study would say that. I've seen sometimes dropping the nap entirely. This child is taking a 2-hour nap and sleeping 8 hours overnight. You drop the nap and then suddenly they're sleeping 10, 11 hours overnight and things have improved drastically.
The classic presentation to me of a kid who's ready to get rid of the nap is a kid that's in daycare. They take the nap because every other kid in the school is taking the nap. But when they nap in daycare, they're up to 10 o'clock at night. And then the weekends, they don't want to nap because they like to hang out with their parents and they go to bed at a normal time.
Yes.
And that's usually a little bit of an older kid, like a 3 or 4 year old. But in those situations, I feel like I'm a little bit more successful in getting the preschool or the daycare to offer some alternative activities because a 3-year-old can self regulate a little bit better than a 2-year-old. They're less
Absolutely.
likely to be disruptive.
Yeah, in some states, I know in Massachusetts, there's you can provide a nap time bag. If you are asking the daycare to keep the child awake, you provide some quiet activities for them to do on their own when everybody else is napping.
like a tambourine and a whistle and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Some drums, play drums, a
Y
whistle,
yeah,
all of
muy
that
tu
stuff.
abuela.
Because a lot of times children just follow the group and the room gets dark and they might put on some soft music or some white noise, and it's hard not to fall asleep at that time. And then it can get in this weird cycle too because they fall asleep because their nighttime sleep has become shortened. So they're tired from their shortened nighttime sleep by the time nap time comes around. But then you have to undo that cycle because it just keeps going forward. Sometimes I can have the parent speak to the daycare provider and they do make accommodations to keep the child up. Not every daycare is going to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Sometimes I
it's
will have them speak to their pediatrician and get a note if it's really causing some problems. A lot of times, staff is taking lunch, they switch on and off. So it does become tricky when daycare comes into play.
here's another one on your lists of myths. Putting a baby to bed later will make him sleep in later.
I know many babies and children are going to bed way later than they should, which is then having negative impacts on their sleep. It often results in a much earlier waking than a later waking. But I know that you recommend bedtime fading, where you're putting them to bed a little bit later and helping them fall asleep faster and then perhaps falling asleep or staying asleep longer. I think this goes into the idea of the next thing I put down, which is desired wake time. So of course,
Sure.
and I don't know where that phrase has to have come from sleep consultants. Like that can't possibly be something from medical literature. Desired wake time. I would
Well,
love
I
for my child's desired wake time to be 8:30 a.m. on the weekend and 6:30 a.m. so she's up for the bus on the weekdays, but we can't these children are not robots and we have to look at what is age appropriate. And I think that's where I get hung up too with putting them to bed later, help them sleep later. It's not necessarily because you've even shared that age appropriate wake time is much earlier than you might think. And so if you want the child to get enough sleep overnight, they're probably going to have to go to bed a little bit earlier because they're programmed to wake earlier.
oh, yeah, no, I would agree. The bedtime fading sleep training technique for a child having a lot of difficulty with sleep with sleep onset, sometimes temporarily moving bedtime later can help. If people are having like they're taking 2 hours for their kid to fall asleep, it can be helpful, but usually then we'll ratchet back the time that the child is falling asleep just incrementally. And I think if parents have to have reasonable expectations about when their kids are going to wake up because yeah, sure. I really didn't want my 13-year-old when he was 7 months old to get up at 4:30 every morning, and that was a little bit out of range, but getting him to 5:30 or 6 was where we wanted to go, and we did find that slowly moving his bedtime a little bit later did help us get there. I think in retrospect, he just didn't need that much sleep.
Mhm.
You put in input X, you're gonna get output Y, right? "Oh, my kid's getting up at 4. I move their bedtime 2 hours later, they're gonna wake up 2 hours later." It does not work that way at all. I think with careful attention to sleep diaries and sleep duration, you can tweak this, but you have to recognize that little kids are most of them are morning larks. Now, have I seen kids who are not like this? I have families where the parent works an evening shift, the child waits up to see them, and the whole family gets up at 10 in the morning, and the kids really adapted to that. It can happen, and that works. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It works well for the family. It's going to work less well when that kid starts kindergarten unless the family makes some accommodations.
Yeah.
And I think desired wake time, I'd say that's something that maybe you would see more in the adult literature on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Like I do this all the time with college students, right? Because high schoolers, they all have to get up a little bit too early for their natural biology. For the desired wake time for a college student, I might say, when's your earliest class? It's at 9. Your desired wake time should be 8 a.m. most days, right? That's what we're shooting for. And we're shooting for a bedtime that will allow you to get a sufficient amount of sleep. But I agree that like it's a little bit of a pipe dream for young kids, this idea that you have a lot of control over when they wake up. We could probably do a whole session on early morning awakenings because they really are so painful. But I would agree that parents, you might be able to adjust this a little bit, but if your kid is waking up anytime between 5:30 or 7, that is very typical for an infant and a toddler. With your first kid, it's a rude awakening. With your second kid, honestly, you've probably become, by hook or by crook, you become a morning person anyway. So I wasn't a morning person and now I am. Now my kids sleep in and I can't. So thanks, motherhood. They've ruined it
Yeah.
for me.
I recently had someone say, instead of 6:30 to 6:30, which I don't know where that came from because I would never say we're going to get your child sleeping from 6:30 to 6:30. Again, it's just so individualized.
You're not 100% guaranteeing that or your money back.
Yeah, like every day 6:30 to 6:30. Just put it and then yeah, okay. They said, "How about 8:30 to 8:30?" And I'm like, my
Okay.
9-year-old was always like a 5:30, 6, sometimes 6:30 sleeper. And only recently did I get her to 7 because I basically was like, if you wake up before 7, I'm not getting up. You're not
You're not
getting
getting your
TV.
iPad.
And so strangely, now she's sleeping until 7 or later. But if I could have had her sleeping till 7 back in those early days when I wasn't used to waking up so early, oh, it would have been a dream. But it's 5:30, like you said. And I like to say 6 to 7 because that's a pipe dream, but 5:30 I see a lot. So anywhere between 5:30 and 6 is usually the earliest. Because some kids just really, like some adults, they're early birds. They're going to wake early no matter what. Yeah, the desired wake time thing, as well as, oh, if I put my baby to bed at 8:30, then she'll automatically sleep till 8:30 sort of thing. I think that's just a pipe dream.
Yes, and that is the nature of parenthood, right? When I was in pediatric residency, did I ever think that I would microwave a plate of pepperoni and serve it to my child for dinner? No, I did not set out to do that, but that's a thing that I had to do because I was a parent. So, is your child's sleep going to be perfect or exactly what you want? Absolutely not. You can expect it to be within a certain realm of quality, but it's not going to be perfect. And I think a lot of what I do is calibrating people's expectation about what's actually realistic. Your 2-year-old's not going to sleep till 10 on the weekends. And if they do,
Yeah.
honestly, it'd be weird.
Yeah, agreed. The expectations thing is one of the most important things in my work because there are so many unrealistic expectations all over the internet, all over social media. Even going back to the wake windows, I can provide this plan and I can show the data, and parents still just like they have it programmed those wake windows, and I'm like, "Just forget you've ever seen those wake windows. Let's look at the data from your child. Look what works well for them." And it can be very hard to undo all of that.
Yeah. And I think it's, as a parent, it's a real trap sometimes that you have a certain, and look, we see it because I work with children with a lot of pretty severe medical issues. It's like a parent has a certain amount of, they imagine how things are always going to be. And it might be something really simple that unfortunately they don't get to have a child that's developmentally normal or a child that doesn't have
Mhm.
some significant health problem. But it can also be a sort of set of behaviors or expectation, and you can maybe nudge your child into a certain direction, but they are who they are.
I think
Um,
that's sometimes a rude awakening for people. You see your friends, and maybe you have 2 friends whose babies can come to brunch and sleep through the whole brunch and then go for a lovely walk, and then you try to bring your baby to brunch, and the baby's screaming the whole time. What is going on? And it's just like you said, or we discussed earlier, I think, you just parenthood is like a real eye opener to like the fact that you only have so much control. This person is an individual. We can provide certain guardrails and boundaries, but they are who they are. And we have to adjust to them because they probably aren't going to naturally adjust to our lifestyle.
Look, here's my hot take. Parents, brunch is over when you have a baby.
It's
I don't think I've been to brunch, honestly, since my kids were born, maybe once or twice. Even when they're older, they have no interest in a leisurely meal that's sometime between breakfast and lunch. It is a concept that is totally unappealing to children. I think I went to brunch once for one of my birthdays. We went out in Brooklyn and my kids were older. It was fine. It was weird. They were showing one of the Alien movies on the TV screens
oh,
there. My kids
geez.
thought that was pretty cool. People ripping out of people's chests and stuff. Yeah, New York's weird. Let's hit our last things so we keep on time here. Never wake a sleeping baby or child.
Okay.
Is this
Well,
something that parents should never do? Is
no.
this a third rail of parenting?
Okay, so if you've got that child who is, say they're 3 years old and they wanna take a 3-hour nap, but then that means bedtime is until 11 p.m. or something if they do that. You've gotta start looking at it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but overnight sleep is more restorative than daytime sleep. Is that accurate?
So I think that in general, for your average healthy adult, that's the case. You get to deeper stages of sleep. And the longer you sleep, the longer you get through the different cycles of sleep, like REM sleep, slow wave sleep, etc. In kids, it's a little bit different. They might actually pass through those deeper stages of sleep. But I would agree with you if it's mucking with the bedtime sleep. And the classic example of this is a kid that gets picked up at daycare. They fall asleep in the car at 5 o'clock. The parents take 30 minutes to drive home, and then the kid's gotten into a deep stage of sleep. The parents have trouble waking them up, and then bedtime's a disaster because the kid just isn't tired. So I would say that if you're really struggling with bedtime, especially in a toddler or preschooler, you got to look at limiting that nap, and especially late in the day. I don't think most kids after 18 months of age should be napping after 5 p.m.
Yeah, I would back that up. Usually, I say 5 p.m. for the infants because even with infants, after 5 p.m. can really start to cause issues. When it comes to those toddlers, if they nap after 3 p.m.,
Yeah, it's
sometimes
a
it's a disaster. Most of the children that I'm working with past 18 months need to be woken, certainly no 3:30 at the very latest. And I guess it also depends, are they on one nap or two? Because if they're on two naps, you definitely need that. You have to look at the sleep needs, and the later the nap gets, like you said, it's harder at bedtime. And if a child is older, then they're going to need more time to build up that sleep drive than a baby that falls asleep at from 5 to 5:30. Like maybe they can stay awake for another 2 hours or something and go to bed. But if you have a 2.5-year-old that's waking up they may need another 4 or 5 hours before they can fall back to sleep normally. And that's when you start to look at the timing and then the length, the duration. So that's never wake a sleeping baby. In the newborn stages, many babies have day and night confusion. Very common for a new baby to not have any idea. They don't have, their goal is to eat, gain weight, sleep, and poop.
honestly, those are on my list of goals as well.
Yeah, I guess
Where
those are pretty basic needs. But with newborns, sometimes you find that they are wanting to sleep long stretches during the day. So during the day, they want to take 4 or 5 hour naps. And then during the night, they want to wake up every 2 hours to eat. So one of the things that I recommend is waking your newborn about every 2 hours during the day to feed them, get them out in the sunlight. We know that sunshine, that light and dark play a big role in the development of melatonin and circadian rhythms. So if you're able to just get them up, feed them, it can start to change things around so that daytime becomes more like waking every 2 hours and nighttime there are longer stretches. It can take some time, but it is something that I recommend at that age as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. Baby's natural circadian drive is not going to emerge till 4 to 6 weeks of age,
Right.
but you still have some control over this, right? They can still learn.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
so I just want to hit our last two, and actually, we'll finish with the teenagers. But let's talk about this one. This one is I don't know if you still I don't live as much on like the sort of mom social media as I did when my kids were younger, and I was blogging more regularly. But this idea of sleep training being selfish
Mhm.
used to have a lot of currency. I feel like I mean, does it still?
Yes, absolutely.
We could talk about this all day, but I would say that moms and dads, if you are absolutely miserable and it's appropriate for you to sleep train your child, there's lots of good reasons why you should do it. You'll be a better parent to your child. You're going to enjoy them more. You're going to have less of a short fuse. This is such an interesting study that somebody shared online, actually looking at mothers driving with babies with insomnia and babies without. And they found that the mothers of infants with insomnia they had on a standardized driving test, they had greater lane deviation, higher maximum speed, and poorer self-ready driving behavior. The fact is, this is really a safety issue, not just for you, but also for your children. And if you are so sleep deprived you can't drive safely, Not only should you not feel bad about doing something about that, it's actually urgent that you do. Again, there's lots of different reasons. We know also that poor sleep in infants is associated with maternal depression in the first year of life. I authorize you to meet with your pediatrician and get started on this issue. It really is very important.
I think you understand that. I see it almost every day. And sometimes it's babies, and other times it's my 3-year-old. I'm sleeping on the floor of my 3-year-old's room because that's the only way that anybody can get any sleep, but I'm not really sleeping well. He's waking up multiple times a night just to make sure I'm there. You'd be shocked at the number of replies that simply say, "Oh, yeah, my 6-year-old, my 10-year-old still sleeps with me because that's the only way anybody can get any sleep." That's a choice for people to make, but the undertone there is that drawing boundaries, which is essentially what we're doing when we're sleep training a 3-year-old. We are teaching them the rules with love and care involved, and they learn really fast. The undertone is that, oh, you're going to basically damage your child, or your child needs you so badly. They need you overnight and they're only little for so long. And I think this can cause people to feel guilty and second guess themselves. When is it going to change? Do I just need to give up and realize that parenting is this hard and unmanageable?
I honestly think parents deserve not to be miserable. There's going to be bad days, right? But if your life is structured, if your child's behavior is making you miserable, get some help.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way. It's hard being a parent. Sometimes people that are tired have so little energy to make positive changes. They want things to be better, but it's hard for them to actually overcome inertia to get things going. But I encourage you, if you are struggling, get some help. Everybody needs
Absolutely.
help sometimes.
Absolutely. There's another study that was interesting that I saw. It was a recent study about how moms groups actually increase cortisol levels of mothers that are in these moms groups, these Facebook groups
Oh
where
my God,
people are
really?
asking. Yes. And I was like, that's really interesting because they are
Brain damage?
oh my God. Yeah, this
Here's
is
at
what we can
11.
start to say. Yeah. I've had people tell me that my profession is abusive to children and someone should call CPS on me, or Child Protective Services or Department of Child and Families. We have to look at the bigger picture here because there's so many studies about the importance of sleep in all ages of children and, of course, adults. So, why do we continue to look at it as a selfish thing when we know it's essential for our overall health, physical and mental? I don't understand why it becomes this controversial thing.
Let me close with one of my hobby horses. We've only talked about little kids here, but really, there's a lot of sleep challenges throughout childhood. And I work
Mhm.
a lot with teenagers with sleep issues. And specifically, there's this myth that there's been a lot of research that your average American teenager is sleep deprived. We're talking 60, 80% of American teens are getting less than 8 hours of sleep on school nights. If we said that 80% of teenagers didn't have access to adequate food or clean water, it would be a national emergency. The driver of this structural sleep deprivation is the average start time for high schools in the US is early, especially true in the Northeast, where I think in Connecticut, our average start time is like 7:20 or 7:30.
Yeah, that sounds
And the
right.
problem is when people move into adolescence, their sleep schedule shifts 2 or 3 hours naturally later. And this predates smartphones, Xboxes, Fortnite, what have you. This was demonstrated in the 90s by Mary Karskat. And in spite of this, if you look at most school districts, school gets earlier for high schools versus elementary schools. So the result of this is you have a population of teenagers who have no control over their schedule, who naturally are going to sleep later, and their school is getting up earlier, and they're getting squeezed into chronic sleep deprivation. I'm involved with a national organization called Start School Later that has actually made a lot of headway. Some states now have start time laws. California passed one a couple of years ago. High schools and middle schools shouldn't start before 8:30. I think Alabama actually just passed a law There's a ton of evidence for this. I've advocated a lot of places, and I hear from parents, teenagers can just go to bed earlier. The fact is, they really can't. If you have a teenager, say in my district, there are some kids that have to get on the bus by 6 in the morning to get to the high school on time. So they have to get up at 5:30 in the morning. For them to get a sufficient amount of sleep, they need to be not in bed, but asleep by 9 or 9:30 at night. It's just not happening between homework and their natural biologic drive. It doesn't mean that teenagers shouldn't be responsible stewards of their own sleep. Like they shouldn't, my kids don't have their smartphones in their rooms. No, they'll tell you it's not a picnic being the teenage child of a sleep doctor. I'm tough with sleep structure and stuff on them. But we also have to create a more sleep friendly society for teenagers. We need to do that for a lot of parents too, right? If you've got moms having to go back to school when their kids are 6 weeks of age, they're going to be sleep deprived too. So that's it for what we've got today. To wrap this up, this has been the Sleep Edit. You can find me at drcraigcanapari.com and at Dr. Canapari on most social media. Ariel, where can people find you?
People can email me at Ariel at arielgreenleaf.com or find me on Instagram at Ariel_Greenleaf.
Okay. And if you found this useful, please share this with your friends. We're just getting this started and really appreciate your listening.